Check.
Okay, that sounds good, does it? Can we read the acoustic room?
Okay, so we'll get going again. We're going to continue our Germany connection, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you today to Olivier Kugler, who is an award-winning reportage illustrator. So I'll hand over to you, Olivier. Thanks.
Can I start?
You can.
Yeah, hello, my name is Olivier Kugler. I'm a reportage illustrator. I love to draw people I meet and places I visit. I'm 52 years old. I've been an illustrator for around 30 years now, 32 years. And yeah, what you can see here, the first slide is shows the cover of a book I did. The book documents, or it contains drawings documenting the circumstances of Syrian refugees in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Greece, England, Germany, and France. I usually talk about this book when I do presentations because this is, I think, this is the work I'm the most fondest of. But I'm not going to talk about this book. But I'm going to talk about other projects I've been working on since I've been a child, basically. And there are lots of ups and downs, many failures, and many rejections I received. And I guess this is the theme of the conference. I'm going to start to show you some work now. This is a drawing. I think I did it when I was 7 or 8 years old. I love comic books. When I was a kid, I fell in love with the medium, and I still am very much inspired by comic book art. And I want to become a comic book artist since I've been a child, more or less. This is a drawings of Captain Blackbeard and some kind of pirate adventures. My father is an artist. He also used to be an arts teacher, and watching him work and seeing his artwork was probably my first serious influence on me wanting to become an artist. These are two etchings he did when I was, I think it was around 4 years old at that time. My mother's French. When I was 9 years old, she gave me this Tintin comic book as a Christmas present, and I totally fell in love with the world that Hergé created with the Tintin characters. And when I was a little bit older, at maybe 12, 13, I was really impressed and inspired by the work of Jean Giraud. He's a French comic book artist. He's in England and the US. He's more better known than his pseudonym Möbius. He did also science fiction comics, but I fell in love with his Western comics that he did, and during that time I wanted to do my own. I was copying a lot of his work. I started with tracing pages or drawings from his pages, and I started to develop my own kind of cowboy Western hero characters. I drew them. I started to draw sequential, I started to draw pages. I really enjoyed doing that. And when I was around 14, we were encouraged at school to seriously think about what kind of careers we would like to follow for our job, what kind of jobs we would like to do, and what kind of trades we wanted to learn. And I asked my father what kind of studies I would need to do to become a comic book artist, and he was just laughing. He told me that you can't really study becoming a comic book artist. It's something you first need to learn how to draw, and then it's probably the closest thing would be to study illustration. And But he told me back then, it's Olivier, you don't become a comic book artist by copying other people's work. You need to first learn the basics. You need to learn how to draw first properly from scratch. And he encouraged me to draw what is around me, draw myself, draw family members, my friends. But I didn't take on his advice. I thought it was really boring, and I wanted to draw kind of action heroes and then kind of shooting scenes, all these kind of things. But and I continued kind of trying to draw my own cowboy stories, but it didn't lead anymore. Where I could see my drawings weren't as good as I wanted them to be, and the stories were even worse. The stories were way worse than my drawings. And I then had another chat with my father. He saw how frustrated I was, and he told me that Ollie, you really need to start to draw, to learn the basics, to start with drawing your hands every day. Draw your hands several times, look at them, draw your face, look in the mirror, do self-portraits, draw your shoes, or a tree, just things that are around you that you can see in front of you. And he also told me I should stop copying other people's work, and I should also not draw from photos. That was one of the big advice he gave me. And I took this by heart, and unfortunately I don't have any drawings from this time in this presentation, drawings I did when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. But my father also gave me a really good Christmas present. He took me to live drawing classes for a year. So every Wednesday afternoon, my father and I went to live drawing classes in the next town. And I really enjoyed doing this work. And I could also see how my work was progressing rapidly. Well, not rapidly, but from time to time you could see how my development was making jumps. And so I finished my school. I was maybe 18, I was 19 years old when I finished my school, and then I had to do military service. I went to the Navy for 1.5 years. When I came back, I applied. I wanted to study illustration, but my father is a lot of artist friends, and they all recommended me. Illustration is a really tough business. It's difficult to find work after you graduated, and they told me I should study graphic design, because the training is very similar, and they also said you will always find work as a graphic designer. It's easy to make a living, or relatively easy to make a living with it. So I would always have a kind of a backup plan if you shouldn't work with illustration. So I applied in Stuttgart, went from originally at the Kunstakademie, at the Arts Academy. They didn't take me, they didn't. I failed the application miserably. It was really difficult, and I just wasn't good enough and ready yet. Then I also applied at a school for applied arts in Pforzheim, and I also failed. So my father told me I should go to a private art school in Stuttgart for a year that prepares students who want to study illustration, who want to study graphic design or art or other design degrees, and they basically teach them, help them to create a really strong portfolio to pass the entry exam to the Arts Academy or to the School of Applied Arts. And I did this for a year, and failing, not getting into the schools that I just mentioned that I wanted to get into was really good for me, because I had a really great basic training in learning to draw at this private school, and it was a very kind of, for the first week, we almost spent every day just drawing straight lines on A2 sheets. They wanted us to become get a very confident line, and then when we managed to draw straight lines, they asked us to draw circles and ellipses, and then they asked us to draw cubes that we had to build out of paper, and then glass, but really large and very precise. That they were really pedantic about us to draw accurate lines. And then later on we did lots of live drawing classes there. We did short sessions, and then but also very long sessions where we spent hours working on one poster for modeling, and again they asked us to really observe and to do accurate drawings. And this helped me to become quite a more confident draftsman. And I don't really see this is more. So yeah, then after a year I applied again and I got a place at to study graphic design at the Fachhochschule in Pforzheim. It's a small city in the Black Forest, but it's quite a really good school with a very good design degrees, and I studied there for 4.5 years. And even though it was a graphic design degree, I could focus on illustration. We had a really good illustration teacher there. He was very encouraging, and I learned the trade of graphic design, and we did lots of logo designs and poster designs, magazine designs, and I really profited from this education, from this training. But I spent most of my time in the life drawing class. For my diploma, I wanted to do an illustration diploma. I wanted to go to Hamburg, to St. Pauli, to the Reeperbahn, to do drawings up there. And when I proposed this project to my tutors, they were very hesitant. Because I told them I just want to create a really good drawing portfolio. They said, "Oh, Oli, you can't do that. You study graphic design. We want you to do a book. You can do your drawings up there on location, but we also want you to work with text, with photography, and to design a book." And yeah, I spent 3 months in Hamburg, and I went to the room, and I went every day. I went every day for almost 3 months. I was drawing every day for 12 hours. I went to a place called Harry's Hamburger Hafenbastbahn. It's a shop. It was more like a warehouse. That was kind of the business was started by a sailor who retired, and he kind of bought kind of things that sailors brought back from journeys to Africa, to the Southeast Asia, and he was selling these things and all kind of bric-a-bracs, and it looked like it was kind of an antique dealer who was also selling lots of kind of kitschy things. But I loved the environment. I loved this place. I spent many hours just drawing things he was selling, and kind of stuffed animals, sharks, and diving helmets, models of boats, and you can see here. And then all these drawings were done on A4 sheets, and I spent time in the red light district. I met this guy. His name is what's his name? I think it's Javi Ross, and he's an artist, and he was painting model paintings of pin-ups that were decorating kind of topless bars on the Reeperbahn, and spent some time with him. I drew street scenes. You can see prostitutes on the street. I was sitting in the bars. I was going through the windows. So these are all drawings that were done on location. I spent a lot of time in a tattoo parlor. Tattoo parlor is a great place where you can draw, and the great characters there. It's quite a really focused environment, and people don't really mind you just sitting there and drawing. And spent a lot of time in the harbor bars, through the characters, the drinking. And I went to the Salvation Army in St. Pauli, and went there during they had a soup kitchen that they are giving out free meals to homeless people at lunch hour. I went there for lunch, but I also spent a lot of time during the people I met there. So a homeless man, he told me, he had one of these also it maybe fits to the theme is today, the closed but no cigars about failures. He told me that he once he went to the bill of license. He wanted to buy some drinks quickly, so he wanted to buy a 6-pack of beer, and then he only noticed when he came back to his mates that was alcohol-free beer, and he was really annoyed about that. And people sweeping off outside. Yeah, then I also spent time with squatters in the Harperstrasse. It was really, I really enjoyed this time, and it was the first time where I really properly started to draw outside of an academic environment. I just went out and explored the location, met lots of people, and I really loved this process. I could see how my drawings were becoming better, and I enjoyed the whole experience, just being outside and drawing people in all these places. And yeah, my teachers, my tutors were really, I mentioned they were really skeptical of this project at the beginning, but they were very happy with this. They saw how I arranged the pages and how the drawings were progressing, and I was also really excited about it, and I got the best possible mark you could get. I got a 1.0 for this project for my diploma, but never happened to me before my whole school and academic career. And I kind of thought that I was an illustrator now, so I took this book. I went to Frankfurt to the book fair. I spent 2 or 3 days there, and I showed this book to every arts director and to every editor who would time to look at my work, and they all said, yeah, it's really nice to like your work, Olivier. Give us your number and we'll call you back. And of course they never called me back. And I also then made small prints of the work and made postcards, and I sent them to art directors of magazines and newspapers in Germany, applying for illustration work, but also unfortunately I didn't get a single reply, so I was quite really frustrated. And I took on the best first job as a graphic designer that I could get. And yeah, I was so frustrated and I was really depressed, but I didn't want to draw anymore, so I stopped drawing for 2 years, and I was working as a graphic designer in a small design agency in Karlsruhe. I quite enjoyed this time. It was well-paid work, I had really nice colleagues, and the work was kind of interesting. We did lots of work for startup internet companies, new media companies. I had lots of freedom there, and I was doing this kind of work, but then all of a sudden I get an email from a good friend of mine who I studied with, and he got a scholarship to do a master's in graphic design at the School of Visual Arts in New York. He sent me an email and he told me that he just met, the night before, he met illustration students from the master's program, and he saw their work, and he wrote that the students there also they're doing exactly the same kind of work that I did when I was in Hamburg. The students, they're getting encouraged to go out into the real and draw real life characters, to draw a location. And he sent me a link to the website, and I saw the work that students were doing there and the tutors. And I fell in love with their work, and all of a sudden I told myself, I need to draw again, I want to do this kind of work. So I built up a new illustration portfolio. I was drawing a lot. Whenever I came home from after work, I was drawing for another 3 or 4 hours, and I applied for a scholarship, and I flew to New York to apply for the school, and then luckily I got a grant from the German Academic Exchange Service, and I also passed the entrance exams. So in the year 2000, I went to New York, and I started to, it was a 2-year degree. It's called illustration as a visual essay, and I basically continued what I've been doing in Hamburg. I continued to draw on location. I went into bars, coffee shops, also tattoo parlors later, and I just looked at the sceneries that were in front of me. And one of my tutors, or the head of the illustration program, Marshall Arisman, he told me, Oli, if you want to become an illustrator, if you want to make a living as an illustrator, you need to find a way to color your drawings. And I was quite passive, and I tried to color my work before. I tried to do this with watercolors, with color pencils. I also tried painting, but it never really worked for me. I didn't like the coloring process. I always much more prefer to create the line drawings. But because I worked as a graphic designer for 2 years, and we did all our designs in a vector-based program called Freehand. And so it came naturally to me that I just scanned in the drawings from a sketchbook, and I composed them on the computer. I created compositions, and I just created very simple vector colorings in the background of these drawings, and I really loved doing it. It kind of came natural to me because I had so much experience working in this program, and I totally enjoyed that. And this was the first time that I really colored my drawings. And so I made these little accordion books. One of my teachers in New York, his name is Illich, he told me I should make a small portfolio, a small accordion book, and send it to the art director of a New York magazine who we knew quite well. And she liked my work. I got an email from her a couple of days later after I sent her this mailing piece, and she told me she would like to meet me. She's got the job for me. So I was really excited about that, and I thought I mentioned I got a scholarship. I got some money that was supposed to pay for 2 years for my tuition fees, but also for my living expenses in New York. But it was just at a time when the euro was introduced, and the German, and before we had the German market, and it was a very strong and very powerful currency, and the money was supposed to last for 2 years. But then, because we changed to the euro, the value of the euro lost significantly compared to the dollar. So in the end, I only had money to let me stay in New York for 1 year, and I was quite worried about that. So getting this commission was really important for me. It enabled me to stay in New York. I was paid $5,400 for it, and it was a perfect commission for me. The editor, she wanted me to illustrate an article that was written by a journalist who wrote an article about launching a hip-hop karaoke web page, and he wanted to become a millionaire with this business enterprise. And in the article, he mentioned all the people that he encountered during this process. And the editor told me that the story was already written, and I mentioned that it's difficult for me. I can't make up scenes. I can only draw what's in front of me. So she had the chat with the journalist, and he told me that I could meet him in his office. I could draw him on occasion. He would also go with me and his friends to the karaoke bar. So I could basically, he was really creating all these scenes for me, so I could draw them on location. I also met all the business associates of him. I could draw them in the houses and locations that were mentioned in the story. This is Russell Simmons, the founder of Def Jam Records. And I didn't know him. I wasn't aware that he's a kind of a superstar. And all my friends, and they were super excited that I was able to meet him. And I met him in his office, and I was drawing him for an hour. And I could really feel, I was really excited to do that, but on the other side, one of the great things is when you draw on location, you kind of, the adrenaline kicks in, and you're very kind of focused, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my arm while I was drawing it. And so this was a really great assignment for me. I mentioned that I got quite a lot of money for it, but it also gave me the confidence to know that I can get illustration work. Before I went there, I thought I would be in New York for 2 years and I'll probably need to come back and work as a graphic designer again. So this was a really good thing that happens to me. I then continued in the second year at SVA. I continued to draw on location, and this is the first kind of a visual essay I made. I was living in Spanish Harlem at this time. Every day I went to school, I walked past, before I went to the subway station, I walked past parking lots where there were lots of car wrecks that were parked there, and I love to draw car wrecks and shipwrecks and places like that. So I took my camping, I had a camping chair, I set it up there, I started to draw the red car. You can see on the right hand side of the spread. I was drawing this car maybe for 15-20 minutes, and all of a sudden one of the car doors opened and this guy came out too. You can see on the left hand side. His name is Alberto. He sat down on, was lots of old junk in this parking lot. He sat down on a chair that was next to my camping chair, and he just started to chat to me, and I asked him if he would mind if I draw his likeness. He says absolutely no problem, but he was asking for $10 modeling fee, so I gave him the money. And while he was sitting there, I drew him in my sketch pad, but he also started to talk about his life, and while I was drawing him, I unconsciously wrote down things that he told me, because I didn't want to forget them. And in the evening, when I showed these drawings to my classmates and also to my tutors, and they all reacted very positively to his approach to the drawing, but they also included text, and they encouraged me to go back and do more drawings at this place. So I spent the next good 3 days on this parking lot and was making drawings of Alberto and the environment. I later noticed that he's a drug dealer. There were all these you could see used syringes lying around there. Sorry, not a drug dealer, a drug user. And he was making a living with finding old toys and bicycles, and he was selling them on stoop sales. And one of the toys he had around him is this old kind of a plastic cuddly toy of a monkey that was also singing it, but randomly on and off, and it was singing the Macarena song. And I made 2 or 3 other pieces of these visual essays, and I sent them to the Guardian newspaper in England, in London, and I told them that I would be in London over the summer holidays, and I asked them if I could maybe come and show them my portfolio, and luckily they liked the drawings. And I met them during the summer break in London, and I started to get commissions from them already while I was still in my second year at the School of Visual Arts. And in 2003, I moved to London, and I started to get a lot of work from the Guardian. And this is quite an important commission I got from the G2 supplement. And they asked me to do drawings of famous people. It was for a New Year's special edition of the G2 supplement. And they had an article where they interviewed famous people, famous journalists about their New Year's resolutions, and they asked me to do illustrations of the people. They first wanted me to meet all these people and draw them on location, but I didn't have a lot of time, so I had to get myself a digital camera. I met most of them, but I didn't have the time to go there, so I took reference photos of the people in their homes or wherever I met them. And Philip Hensher is an author, he's a famous chef, I forgot his name, met in his kitchen. So, because I wasn't able to draw from life, at the beginning I was really worried that I thought I told myself I can't draw from photos because I always drew from life before. But when I worked on these drawings and I had the photos as reference on my screen, I noticed I had much more time to work on the likenesses of people. So the likenesses became better, and the drawings were also better. And I liked the drawings better than my on location work, but I think this work is still, it still looks like it's done on location because it has this fluidity, and it probably profits from the fact that I've been spending so much time drawing on location. And so this was quite an important commission for me. And then I got more work from the G2 supplement, and they also encouraged me to work more in a sequential way and to work more with text, to interview people, and to work more in a journalistic way. What worked really well for me, and I enjoyed this approach. I could meet people from all walks of life. I was living in my land in East London at that time, and I met this little traveller boy who lives in a caravan, and I was asked to do a piece about Christmas, and so I just took Christmas as an excuse to interview this kid about. I asked him what did I say Christmas and what kind of Christmas presents he wanted. So I did that. It was published as a full page in the G2 supplement. And the editor and the art directors of the G2 supplement, they liked my work. And they asked me if I would like to join a team of journalists and photographers to go to Shanghai in China for a week. And they asked me to do a small series of drawings of people I meet during this trip. And these drawings were also never published. So I didn't, at this stage of my career, I didn't draw from photos anymore. I spent my time on location, finding people I'm interested in drawing, and I take lots of reference photos and I spend my time interviewing the people. And I did another one of a river captain who I joined on a journey on the river. And it was at a time when The Guardian was redesigned, and the new art director at the G2 and the editor of the G2 supplement, they asked me if I would like to do a piece that runs regularly at the G2 supplement. They wanted to call it Kugler's People. It was supposed to be a spread, and they asked me to draw just normal, random people whose lives are somehow connected to current affairs, and they sent me, this was the first piece I did for them. They sent me to Blackpool and asked me to do a spread, a drawing and this text about the couple that runs the B&B, bed and breakfast place in Blackpool that houses politicians during the party conference season. And this is another piece. It's probably my favorite from this series. It portrays my fruit and veg guide. I bought my fruit and vegetable every morning in Bethnal Green. And there's another one. He's a retired wrestler and a halal butcher. I was asked to go to Bradford it was just after the 7/7 attacks in London. They asked me to go to Bradford to meet a Muslim from Pakistan who basically spent most of his life in England, but was born in Pakistan. And they didn't tell me who I should draw. They just sent me up to Bradford. And for me, this was such a beautiful project to work on, because I was able to kind of to travel within England to meet, to go to places I probably wouldn't have gone otherwise. And I just met him by chance. I walked past a butcher shop and I saw him there, and he invited me to his house, and I spent time with him and his family. I could go on there and interview him. Dr. Brownwood, I met her, was during the bird flu pandemic, and I was also able to go to a prison in Kingston prison at the south coast, and I spent 2 hours with Roger, who was serving a life sentence. And I was able to interview him and draw him. And yeah, then unfortunately we had the financial crisis happen in 2008, and I lost my spot guardian. They told me they don't have the space anymore because of the financial crisis. They lost lots of advertising clients. They had the paper became smaller. They had to cut pages, and they also had to cut their illustration budget drastically. Illustrations is a luxury for a newspaper and a magazine, and the illustration budgets are one of the first things that are getting cut when a financial crisis hits. So I was really frustrated for me because, again, this was just a perfect assignment for me, and I loved doing that, and I could see my work was getting better. And yeah, in a relatively short amount of time, I lost my best client. I did lots of other commissions as well, but the client was my most favorite and also my most important client. So I had a summer where I didn't get a lot of work, but I tried to make the best out of it, and I just went out in my neighborhood in Bethnal Green in East London and just started to draw council flats, people I met there, homeless people in front of Tesco, a dog lady, a dog. I was spending time with the Bethnal Green Massive and drawing local drug dealers. And this was the first time I started to draw on location again. And while I was working on the spreads for G2 for the mountain, I really enjoyed that I had a double spread as a space to work on. It's quite a large space. Usually when you do editorial designs, it's very rare that you have so much space for your work. But I also thought it would be nice to do longer pieces that go over several pages, sequential pages, sequential work. I wanted to reportage comics, and I happened to go to Paris for a weekend break, and I spent another week there in Paris. I took my portfolio with me to show it to art directors in Paris to get some new work. And I went into a bookshop and I saw a copy of a new magazine. It's called 21. You can see a copy of the magazine here. 21 means 21, like 21 for the 21st century. And I didn't know this magazine before, and it was absolutely beautiful. I picked it up, I looked through it, I browsed through it, and I saw that it's a reportage magazine. It's a little bit like the New Yorker, but just longer. And every article, it's a reportage magazine, current affair magazine, and all the articles in its publication are illustrated. And these are some sample pages from the magazine. These are not my illustrations. And what I like most about this publication is that at the end of the magazine, they had a 30-page reportage graphic novel. And I wanted to do that, so while I was in Paris, I phoned the art director of the magazine. I told him I'll be in Paris for a couple of more days, and that I did lots of work for the Guardian, and that I would really like to work for the magazine. And I asked him if he would come and meet him, so he invited me to his office the next day. I showed him the work I did for the Guardian, and soon later he gave me a commission, and I did a double-page spread for them. I don't have the drawing I did for them in this presentation, but they asked me they told me I should just do a drawing that documents a certain place in London and a certain situation. So I went to a pub in Bethnal Green and I just did the double-page spread depicting the pub's interior, but also kind of the regulars hanging out in the pub. And a little bit later I moved to a new studio, and one of my studio mates, he is Iranian. He comes from Iran, and he had a little travel agency in the studio. And and he made me really curious about Iran, and I decided to go to Iran, to go there on not a holiday, but on a trip, and I wanted to draw when I was there. I was wanting to research, maybe, I wanted to create a kind of a graphic novel reportage piece. So I sent an email to the art director of the French The magazine, mentioned that I was about to go to Iran, and on the next day I got an email from the editor of the magazine. His name is Patrick de Saint-Exupéry. He's a grandson of the chap who wrote the Little Prince, and he is a really charismatic character, quite a courageous person, and he hasn't seen a lot of my work, but he told me, he said, I want you to go to Iran and you can do a story. I want you to do a 30-page graphic reportage story that we want to publish in the magazine. And I told him that I would really like to do a story about a truck driver, because I wanted to travel to the country and I wanted to meet a trucker who I could join on a journey that takes several days through the country. And he said, just fine, just do it. And so I asked Ali, the studio mate of mine, and I just asked him as a joke if he knows any truck drivers in Iran by any chance. So, and he said that a friend of his owns a trucking company in Tehran, and he basically, through this contact, I was introduced to Mazi, a truck driver. I was 38 years old when I met him, exactly the same age that I was. And I had the ambition, I wanted to do great drawings. I was interested in the sequential aspect of a sequential narrative, but I also wanted to do the work of a journalist, and I wanted to do a reportage about this character. The big problem for me was that I don't speak Farsi and Mazi doesn't speak any English, so I wasn't able to interview him. But I'm back in London through the help of my friend Ali. He said that he would translate that and he would help me with interviewing him on the phone then. So I spent 4 days with him. I joined him on his journey. He had to be at the beginning of the trip, he had to go to the mechanics to get new tires and new kind of brakes for his truck. And I loved to, in this whole story, there isn't a lot happening. There isn't really any action. I'm just documenting what I saw, and I really love to draw these. I love to go on road trips, and I love to draw the people and the sceneries. I love to draw what people are eating, and I enjoyed drawing him just sleeping in his cabin. So while I was with him, I was taking thousands of reference photos. I made little sketches, I made little notes, and so he's picking up a load of bottled water that he has to basically drive through the whole country, through Tehran, through the desert, to a small island in the Persian Gulf, Iranian holiday resort. I met his family, we spent an afternoon at his house, and I just fell in love with the kind of the sceneries. It reminded me a lot of the characters of I mentioned the Blueberry comics. I also loved to watch spaghetti westerns when I was a kid, and the whole sceneries in the desert reminded me a lot of the kind of cowboy movies I saw and the westerns I read. And so I came back to London, and I started working on the drawings. I wanted to conduct the interview with Mazi, and my mate Ali, he who wanted to be interviewed with me, and the translation, he's a little bit, he was a little bit slow, he was a little bit, he wasn't very straightforward, and he always said, you can do the interview the next day, we do it the next day. He said, this week I don't have any time, so a month passed and I started working on these drawings. I maybe had already 4 pages finished. And so finally, Ali found the time to call the truck driver. But whenever we called Masi, he answered the phone and he said he can't talk with us at the moment. He was driving, and so we called him several times more until we found out that he doesn't really want to talk with us. He felt queasy and it was quite frustrating because I could only do this piece if I had an interesting interview that goes along with the story and with the drawings. And so I had a chat with the editor of the magazine, and he told me, I really like the drawings, they're really capturing Iran, and I want you to progress, and we will find a way to make this work. So he, through a friend of him, who is a photographer, an Iranian photographer, she was able to call the truck driver's house, and she started to, the trucker was, and before we only always called him on his mobile phone, but then the French Iranian photographer calls the house, one of the truck driver's daughters answered the phone, and she said that her father is not in the house at the moment, he's on tour. So the French photographer, she started to interview the daughter. She asked her all the questions that I wanted to ask the truck driver. And the daughter said she should call back for more questions in a couple of days when her father is back. So the French Iranian journalist, she called back and the telephone was answered by the wife of the truck driver this time, and she started to swear at the photographer. She told her that she's a traitor, that she is not a proper Iranian, and that she should get stoned, basically, that they should throw petroleum over her head and she should get burned. And it was then when the photographer noticed that the truck driver, the family of the truck driver, they probably got a phone call from the secret police, from the Iranian police, telling that he was not allowed to talk to foreign media. So they had to pretend that they don't want to talk with us, and that's the reason why the wife of the journalist of the truck driver was so rude to the lady. So this was really. And it was also during the time when they had elections in Iran, so it was a really sensitive issue. And even though I knew that I won't be able to do anything political, that I won't be able to ask him questions about the regime, but I was very much interested in just documenting the daily life of the truck driver. So we had to use there was hardly any material we could use for this as text that goes with the story. We could only use the information that the daughter of the truck driver gave us. So I was quite really frustrated about that, because I spent the whole year working on these drawings, and then I had this ambition to do something, a really good piece of work. And but still I was really happy with the drawings, and I handed them I submitted them to the Victoria and Albert Museum's Illustration Awards, and then half a year later I got an email, and I learned that this piece was awarded with became the overall winner of the Illustration Awards in 2011. So it was, even though I kind of think this piece was a failure, it didn't work as much as I wanted it to be, I was really excited that my illustration peers gave it such a prestigious prize, and also got some money from that, so it was really good, and it encouraged me to continue doing this kind of work. And I got another commission from the same magazine to do a piece about a French veterinarian in Laos who works with elephants, and works with elephants in the logging industry in Laos. And this piece was another 30-page piece. It was also published by a Swiss-German publisher as a booklet, and this publication led me to this work was also seen by Doctors Without Borders in Switzerland, and they are the partners of a comic book festival. It's called the Fumetto. It's a really big and prestigious comic book festival in Europe. They are partners of the festival, and they asked me if I would like to go into the field and to go to Iraqi Kurdistan and to create drawings documenting the circumstances of Syrian refugees. So, but this is a project we can talk about another time. Maria Stewart was so kind to invite me to come to Preston again in October and to talk about this work, but also about another project I'm working on with a journalist. It's a book project. We want to make a book about fish and chips, and we want to use fish and chips as a vehicle to talk about subject matters like migration, about international trade, about cultural identity, and it's a really exciting project. And I guess you are talking about failure and about rejections, and I suffered a lot of kind of these little failures that I mentioned before, and while working on the book on the Syrian refugees, I became aware. I'm not a natural storyteller, but I love to draw people. I love to document places, and one of the things that I learned is that I would really like to work. I want to continue this approach, working as a journalist and in a narrative, sequential manner. But I think my work will gain a lot. I will be able to reach larger audiences if I work with a journalist, a writer, a natural storyteller. And I guess this is something we can talk about with when I'm going to come to Preston the next time. And yeah, I guess this was my presentation, and I'm sorry, I think I talked longer than I was supposed to do. And if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Give me 1 second, I need to answer the door quickly. I'm really sorry.
Hold that for
I also need to charge the battery. Very well.
Is there anyone else who has questions?
Sorry, I can't hear you. I put it in the last place, maybe I can.
Just go to the yeah, go to yeah. If you've got a question, just talk to the computer.
Don't.
Alright, okay. That's better, yeah? Do you still use freehand then alongside that when you take your photos then? What makes you select the certain colours and like leaves parts out?
Yeah, I'm still using freehand. And you probably know that this program system never ceased to exist. I think maybe 10 years ago, even longer. But I still work on a Mac where the system supports these programs. Yeah, I guess it's the light down on this headset needs to be used.
Can you put your mic down on the headset?
Right? Is this better? Yeah, when I started to use freehand, when I started to color my drawings, you might remember the drawings, the coffee shops in New York. I colored everything. I colored every piece of the kind of the format that was available. And when I continue doing that, I notice that you don't need to do that. Sometimes it's just enough to just cover the most important thing that the people you that are talking, the people who the focus should be on. So, and I also quite like the transparency that you can see through the drawings, and there's something. I guess you could, in a way, you could achieve similar effects with watercolors, but it's just more practical to do this on the computer because you can try different variations. You can sometimes like the cover here. I probably didn't do this with this cover, but sometimes I almost color everything within a drawing. But then I notice I don't really need any color in the background. I need to tone down the color in the background because it becomes too important. And if you do this digitally, it's just so easy to change things that you're not happy with or to try different variations, color variations. And I would love to color my drawings with watercolors. I like the spontaneity and the freshness of it. This may be something I'll do at a later stage, but I'm still really happy to work digitally in freehand with the directors. Does this answer your question, Nick?
That's great, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Any other questions? Kimberly, have you got one?
Do you have a social media? Yeah, that was a question about your social media.
Yeah, I'm 52 and I kind of find it difficult. I'm not really present on social media. I've got a website, I've got a Twitter account. I don't tweet a lot. I usually only tweet when I've got when I'm having an exhibition or if some drawings of mine are getting published that I'm really happy with, then I tweet about it, but otherwise I'm not very present on social media. Everyone tells me about Instagram, but I haven't really, I should do that. And I think I'll take this up in the future, but I still haven't really found the time or the kind of the view set to do that.
Any other questions? John?
Is there any part of his journey that he would change?
Is there any part of your journey that you would change? That's from John.
Yeah. I guess if I could do a change, I think I would have started to work earlier with a journalist instead of doing my own stories. But on the other side, I quite enjoy doing that too, and I think it's part of the process I try to do something, I try to improve as long as I can, and then if I run into dead end, then you notice that, and then you can change and do things. I guess I should have, I mentioned when I studied graphic design, and I was quite comfortable and maybe a little bit lazy when I chose the school where I wanted to study. I studied in Pforzheim, this 15 minutes from my parents' house for my friends where they grew up and went to school with. And I wish I would have been more adventurous. I should have gone to Leipzig in East Germany. I was just also, I was 19 when the wall came down, the Berlin Wall. And 2 years later, I could have studied in Leipzig in Eastern Germany, and I should have done that. I think this would have been much more exciting. These were very exciting times in East Germany, and I didn't do this because of laziness, maybe being comfortable, maybe also a little bit too insecure to go too far away from home. And this is the thing I would have changed there. And I would have maybe also not worked as a graphic designer for almost 3 years. I would have maybe applied for a scholarship to go to New York earlier. But having said that, I think this time working as a graphic designer benefited me a lot. I learned a lot about composition, dealing with clients, learned a lot about colors. I was sitting next to the guy who was doing he was the graphic designer, but he was preparing the print files, and he was really good at Photoshop. He showed me how to optimize colors on the computer, something that I wasn't familiar with, and I also became very fluent in working in this computer program and in freehand that I used to do we did all our layouts, all the designs in this program, and this helped me a lot with the coloring, but also with the placing of type. Yeah, the typography is an important aspect of my work. It's an important part, the type, the text. And I think I learned, or I don't think I'm a really good typographer, but I think it helped me a lot. Having this training as a graphic designer, studying it, but also working as a graphic designer. So you can say you would like to go back in time and change things, but then there would have been other things that you would have missed out to. So yeah, I hope this answers your question.
Can I ask a quick one as well, Olivier? Do you always have a sketchbook?
Please?
This is from me. Have you got a sketchbook with you all the time?
No, if I got a notebook with me more or less all the time to make notes. Yeah, but that's what when I was a student, then I was studying graphic design and later illustration in New York, I always had a sketchbook with me. And I drew all the time. I had to wait for the bus or the subway in New York. I took out the sketchbook and I was drawing what was around me, what was in front of me. Whenever I went to a bar and I was waiting for friends, I just started to draw. And this helped me a lot. This is if you want to become an illustrator, this is something you need to practice all the time. It's like if you want to become a pianist, you need to practice all the time. Or if you're a sportsman, you need to do the basics, the kind of the fitness training, do your push-ups every day and sit-ups, and that's what you need to do. I encourage you all the design students, the graphic designers and the illustrators to take a sketchbook with you and draw a lot. And I think nowadays for you guys it's really tempting that you look, when you wait for the bus or the train, you look into your mobile phones. But I would encourage you to open sketchbook and draw what's around you. This will benefit you much more. It will help your observational skills and also you just become a better drawer, a better draftswoman. Yeah.
Any other questions before we finish? Yeah, Steph.
With being like reportage artists, does the weather ever like impact whether you decide to like go out or not, and like does the weather actually like change what you see and like who you see, like difference between say being in the red light district or being like in say near like corporate businesses?
I don't think you've got any of that.
Nope.
Does the weather ever impact your reportage illustration when you're out and about? Does it affect how you tell the story of what you see? Is that
Yeah,
right?
Whether it affects you doing your artwork or affects like what you see and how you see it.
Does weather have an impact on what you see and how you see it?
Not really, no. It would affect my work probably much more if I would still draw on location. But when I'm on location now, I take photos and I conduct interviews that I record. And I guess when we're talking about the weather, I can maybe quickly show you some of the drawings I did when I was in Domis in the refugee camp in Iraq in Kurdistan. And I was there in December, I spent 2 weeks there, and the weather was atrocious. It was raining, snowing, and all the roads were kind of muddy in the camp. They didn't really have any proper roads, was just dirt track. And I guess that the weather, it doesn't affect me, but it certainly affects the drawings. And I guess I could have done these drawings too if someone from Doctors Without Borders, who is in the camp, would have sent me these photos. But I think these drawings are so much more better because I was there
I experienced the cold, I walked through these muddy roads. I looked the people I drew, I spent time with them, I looked them in the eyes, I saw them crying. And I think this makes my work so much better than if I would just work from photos that clients send me. And yeah.